What is up everyone, Roadrunner back with another Adobe Premiere Pro tutorial. Today we're going to be covering basic color grading. Let's get started. Just a heads up before I start the video, I'm only going to be going over the basics to color grading, so I will not be covering the Lumetri Scopes tab. However, I do have a more extensive color grading tutorial planned for the future, so be on the lookout for that. Awesome, so I have Adobe Premiere Pro up on my screen, and the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to click on Color. This is going to switch to my color workspace. So there's a few ways you can go about color grading. What you can do is you can double click a video in your project panel, and this will bring up your clip in your source panel. Now what you can do is you can use the Lumetri color tab and make your color grading and your color correcting here, or you can drag it directly onto a timeline and you can color grade it here as well in the program panel. Or what you can also do is right click in your project panel, go new item and adjustment layer, and you can drag this out over on top of your clip, and you can actually do your color grading on the adjustment layer. And if you haven't used an adjustment layer before, all it is a transparent piece of video that goes over top, and whatever effects you apply to that will be applied to the clips down below without affecting the original file of those clips. So it's all really a preference thing. I think the best way to do it is to double click on a clip and bring it up in your source panel and do all your color correcting here. And then what I like to do is put it on the timeline and do my color grading in the program panel. Now you're probably wondering, what is the difference between color correcting and color grading? Color correcting is getting the right white balance or exposure to your shot if you didn't do it correctly when you shot it. So I highly recommend white balancing every shot. I will cover color correcting in a different tutorial in the future. So I have my clip here on the timeline, and you may notice that I switched to the effects controls panel rather than the source panel. And that's because I wanted to show you, whenever you're making an adjustment in the Lumetri color tab, you'll notice that any adjustment I make, it automatically applies a Lumetri color, or Lumetri, however it's pronounced, effect into my effects controls panel for this specific clip. So I'm going to start over and delete that. So this clip and all the clips you will see today were shot in CineStyle. And what CineStyle is it's a profile that you can download for your camera. I use a Canon SL2, and this is a neutral profile. So later in post, when I'm doing all my color grading, I have so many more options and variations of what I can do. If you're interested in downloading CineStyle for your DSLR camera, feel free to click the link in the description below. So I'm just going to go over a few of these. I'm not going to cover the entire Lumetri color tab. So I'm going to start with basic correction. If I did have any white in this shot, I could use this eyedropper here and select something that's white, like the edge of this flower, but as that's not pure white, so it does give me kind of weird readings. If your shot's looking a little bit orange, you can push it to the blue, or if it's already looking blue, you can push it a little bit into the orange. You can also change the tint of it to be a little bit green, or if you want it to be a little bit more purple. But for me, I really don't tweak these unless my white balance is really off. As I said before, I highly recommend everyone white balances their shot before actually hitting record. I can change any of these by moving the slider, or I can come over here and I can type in a specific number, or I can come over here and use the up and down arrows to go up by one number or down by one number. Now on a Mac, if you hold the Command key and use the arrows, it will go by 0.1. I believe if you're on a PC, you can hold Control and use the arrow keys. And I can just use the Tab key on my keyboard to move to the next value as well. And you can also double click it to reset any number that way. Oh, and you can also change these numbers by holding Shift and going up or down, and that will go by 10 numbers. So now that we have that out of the way, I'm going to say that I think this shot is looking a little bit too washed out and bright. So I'm going to turn the exposure down to -0.5, and then I like a little bit more contrast in my images. So I'm going to change this to 25. And you know what? I actually think it may need a little bit more, so I'm actually going to change it to 35. If you're unfamiliar with the exposure triangle, I do have a tutorial coming up in the near future that covers the f-stop, shutter speed, and the ISO settings on your DSLR camera, so be on the lookout for that tutorial. And that is the key to getting your shots properly exposed when you're on a shoot. The contrast is the difference between the brightest and the darkest areas in the scene. So now we're going to move on to the highlights, and this is the actual bright spots in the video. So you'll notice as I move up, it's bringing up a lot of those bright areas, and as I move down, it's taking those lighter areas in the image and kind of making them a little bit darker. So I'm just going to reset this for now. And the shadows, as you may guess, are the darkest parts of your image. So as I pull them up, you'll notice some of those dark areas are becoming more white. And as I pull them down, you'll notice some of those darker areas being a little bit more dark. So I'm going to change my shadow to about -50, and I'm going to change my highlights to about -15. And your whites obviously represent the white in this image. And as you pull them down, they go black, and vice versa with the black. So I'm going to set my black to -15. And for me, this shot and the focus of the shot are really these two flowers right here. That's really where the focal length is set in. So I really want to emphasize the pink in this shot. So what I can do is I can go to saturation, and I'm going to change that to 110. And what saturation does is it really brings out all the colors in the image. Now, if you wanted to go for an extremely dramatic effect and shoot in black and white, you can take your saturation and bring it all the way down. But this one, I'm going to do 110 for my saturation. So that pretty much covers the basic correction other than LUT. LUT is a different look, and I can actually go into LUT in more detail here. It's similar to a look where you have all these different looks that are already in Adobe Premiere, but you can download them from the internet and install them into Adobe. And if you're saying, oh, I want to see what that looks like without having to, scroll down and click on it, you can actually just use these arrow keys here, and it will show you what it looks like. And there are so many different looks, I would definitely suggest you play with them. And if you want to see what it looks like on screen, you can just click on it. And when I first started out, I thought if I turned up the intensity, it would look really cool. And it kind of does, but at the same time, if you overdo it with the intensity, your image won't really look real. It'll look a little bit extra, as most people would say. So if you're going to use a specific look in the creative tab, I would say definitely turn it down, keep it to a lower number. Sometimes I think, 50 is about as high as I would go, unless I'm going for something really, really dramatic. However, for this shot, I'm not going to use a look at all. Now, sometimes if your shot is slightly out of focus, what you can do is you can turn up the Sharpen. I like to turn it up to about 15 or even, let's do 20. And it's just going to sharpen up the edges in the video. So next, this brings me to Vibrance, and what Vibrance does is it increases the intensity of the muted colors more than the ones that are already saturated. So if I bring this up, you'll notice a lot of the colors in the image are getting more intense, including the pink, but the pink is not getting as intense as the green. So if I bring this all the way down, you'll notice it will make the image look a little bit more washed out. So I'm not going to mess with Vibrance for this clip, but definitely play with all of these creative options that you have here. And again, we have the opportunity to bump up the saturation or bring it down again here. But since I already did that in the basic correction tab, I'm just going to leave this one as it is. I'm going to cover shadow tint and highlight tint in a later video. The curves is really where I like to have a lot of fun. So let's say I want to bring up the pink in this image. I can use the dropper tool here and get a good sample of this pink here. And what you'll notice it did was created 3 dots along this line. So let's say I take the middle one and I bring it all the way down. What it's going to do is pull all of that specific color out of the image. And if I bring it all the way up, it's going to create more saturation for that color specifically. Now you can see how this could be taken too far. Some of these colors are, kind of blending together here, and that's not what we want. So we don't want to bring it up all the way. And you'll notice if we bring it closer to the pink dot versus the orange dot, the color changes a little bit. So when I use this effect, I like to go a little bit more subtle and bring it up like 1 or maybe even 2 blocks if I need to. And we can see how this looks with or without that effect. Now onto hue versus hue. So let's sample a color. Let's just sample this green here. And again, you'll notice it brings up these 3 dots. Now this is not the same as hue versus saturation. What this actually does is it changes whichever specific color of these you want. And you notice as soon as I click, there's this vertical line that comes up that represents all the colors. If I pull this down to the blue, you'll notice all of this green value turns blue. And if I pull it up, you'll notice as it hits this red area, it turns kind of red. But for this image, I'm not going to use this. This is not something I use often. I really end up just using the hue versus saturation. And before we finish up today's video, as always, feel free to hit the subscribe button and comment down below what you'd like to see in future videos. Also, check out my gear list in the description. So lastly, I'm going to cover today is Vignette. Now, what a vignette is, you may have seen these before, is they're kind of this little opaque adjustment around the edges of your image. You'll notice as I bring it up, it turns white. And what this is really great for is this is great for if you're doing a flashback in your short film or something like that, or a dream world, that's when this is really good. And if you want to give it a more dramatic effect, you can bring it down and it will turn black around the edges. And by, manipulating midpoint or roundness, or even the feather, you can really create a lot of different things with this vignette. And vignettes, I think, are really best used for a dramatic situation or when you're trying to put emphasis on something. I definitely would not use a vignette with every single shot, but we're not going to use that one for this one. And if we want to see what this image looked like before and after, we can come over here to our effects control panel, and there's this little FX button on the Lumetri color line. And if I just toggle that on and off, you'll be able to see what the effect is like when it is off or applied. So sometimes when I'm color grading, I like to go back and forth just to see how much of a difference I truly made with the image. Once it's on the timeline, you can come back and make any of these adjustments whenever. However, if I double click on a shot and I do my adjustments here, so let's say I'm doing my color correcting in the source monitor and I want to bump up the, contrast a little bit, and I want to make this image a little bit more saturated, and I want to take the exposure down, and I want to go to my curves and go over to hue versus saturation. I can come over here and get a good sample of the leaves in the background, and I can really pull up those greens. And let's say I like this shot and I put it on my sequence. Well, you'll notice when I go over to the same clip on my program panel and I click on the effects controls, you notice that the Lumetri color isn't there. The one that I already applied to it is not on the one that's here. So in order to change those colors, I would actually have to find this clip in my project panel, which since I only have 3 clips, it's pretty easy, but I can always right click. I can click on Reveal in Project. And then once I double click on it and I move this over to my program panel and I pull up my effects controls, then you'll notice my Lumetri color is there. So if you do make changes on clips when they're in the source panel, you will have to go back to that clip from the project panel. That's why I like to do a lot of my basic color correcting when it's in the source panel and do all of my color grading here on the timeline. I would definitely say give yourself some time and play with all of the settings in the Lumetri color tab. There are so many options to color grade your footage, and this is really just the basic foundational understanding of color grading. This was the easy way to take this shot and turn it into this. Thank you so much everyone for joining me for another video. As always, feel free to comment down below what you'd like to see in future videos. Take it easy.